Well, welcome to another one of our webinars, our short webinars, as an introduction to the regulation of medical devices and IVDs. Today, this particular webinar, we're going to be talking about general safety and performance requirements and what we used to call in old money essential requirements. And it is my pleasure to introduce James Pink to our meeting this afternoon. James is a senior director with the Elements Group, but has over 25 years of experience in the medical devices industry, which includes 10 years as a health technology expert and lead auditor for a leading European notified body. He actually began his career as a product designer in the oil tools industry, moving into medical physics and clinical engineering at the Royal Hallamshire Hospital in Sheffield. His industrial experience includes managing product development and quality assurance programs for active and non-active implantable devices, as well as combination products. James is a regular contributor to several medical device standards committees, including those responsible for standards such as ISO 13485 and 14971, but also as a contributor to a number of various product-related standards, which are very specific to those products. So it's my real pleasure to introduce James as a no better authority in talking about general safety and performance requirements today. So welcome, James Pink, to our discussion, this particular webinar, where we're actually going to talk about general safety and performance requirements as they're now described within the medical device regulation, or in old money, essential requirements. And when you get as grey as I am, you tend to think of them as essential requirements. But this is running on from some of our previous discussions, James, on how we then sort of come to think about the technical requirements of our product and that sort of stuff. So maybe we could first sort of describe where we find these essential principles, where we find these GSPRs as we know them, and what we need to do to satisfy them. That's a big question, right?
Hiya, Phil. Thank you. And again, thanks for inviting me to this really important topic. This is how ultimately we get safe and effective medical products into a market. These general safety and performance requirements should never be, ever be treated anything other than the most important thing you need to know and do in order to be able to, get that product as safe and as effective as physically possible. Where the essential requirements. Wow, let's do a bit of history here. I mean, basically, essential requirements existed because of European legislation. Ultimately, over the years, the new approach directives, which I think were sort of brought into force in the late 80s, early 90s, as part of the European Economic Area, and of course the whole, how do we stop all this overburdensome checks at different sort of borders, particularly in Europe, how do we get sort of like somewhere where we can all say yes, if it's made this way and it complies with this directive or this regulation, then yes, we're okay. And I think that those essential principles, those essential requirements, those GSPRs, we're going to use that terminology interchangeably today. I guarantee it. But they all came out from regulatory agencies coupled with technical agencies such as standards development committees, technical experts in electronics, physics, materials, biology, sterilization sciences, you name it. Now we've got software and cyber and artificial intelligence now that we all arrived under an agreement to develop what are the core safety principles. And I like to think of it as basic as, something like a plug. Ultimately you buy a plug from and maybe a cable. There you go. You can't even see the brand, but you can see there's a plug and a cable there. But as soon as you put that into a socket, you want to know that there are some basic electrical safety things going on there. Number one is I ain't going to be on the receiving end if I touch this of 240 volts. So that's the first helpful bit. The second is that, like I always do nowadays, it's left on permanently. So I don't want it to sort of, catch fire. I don't want it to blow up. I don't want it to burst into, a series of toxic gases. And when I'm touching this, which I often am, I also don't want to have any nasty, horrible residual things on me. And that's where the essential principles came from, this sort of cohort and agreement under various technical and regulatory committees coming to an agreement about basic requirements for machinery, basic requirements for electrically powered devices, basic requirements for devices that have to be presented in a sterile state, basic requirements for devices that are now using programmable software or our software themselves. So those essential requirements have been established, and like anything, they change over time, very much like we've seen, our sockets and the way that we protect our circuits through residual current devices and circuit breakers and all sorts of things have changed over time, and our expectations around what we call a high level of protection, or other words that you'll hear of such as state of the art. Our expectations grow over time as our technical knowledge around safety increases. It was only in 1957 that we were still using X-rays as a means of confirming pregnancy. I mean, how stupid is that now? But even in the late 50s, in the physics and biology community, we didn't know that X-rays presented an unacceptable risk to a fetus. We didn't know that. But now we know that definitely. So we have essential requirements in the medical device regulation dealing with energies that are potentially harmful. And they are ionizing radiation sort of levels of energy, and also non-ionizing radiation levels. So those essential principles are brought together, and for various regulatory regimes, from toy safety to building and construction products to electrical products, and then into medical devices and in vitro diagnostics, we have this set of essential requirements, and they always appear at the first annex of the regulation or the directive. So in the case of essential requirements for medical devices, pull out the regulation, go to Annex 1, and there they are. Go to the regulation in IVDs, go to Annex 1, and there they are. And when regulatory agencies realize that, hey, this is a good idea that Europe are doing, we should probably do this around the world, the International Medical Device Regulators Forum and its predecessor, the Global Harmonization Task Force, looked at those essential principles and went, well, do you know what? That's applicable for devices in Canada. It's applicable for devices in Australia. It's applicable for devices in Central Asia and Southeast Asia. We've now got also these international essential principles of safety and performance. So you can find on the IMDRF website also an international sort of codification of essential principles as well. And they're really helpful if you're wishing to move out into other jurisdictions away from Europe as well. Sorry, it was a very long-winded answer, that, mate. My apologies.
No, not at all. Do you know, in one of our previous discussions where we were talking about classification, I think we sort of discussed that the regulations themselves cover everything from tongue depressors through to linear accelerators and that sort of stuff. Do you use the same list of GSPRs for both products?
Yeah, you do. You basically, some will be applicable and others will not. It's very much now down to the intended purpose and the device characteristics that will help you understand whether a GSPR is applicable or not applicable. It's not that you don't want, applicability does not mean that you don't want to do the testing or you don't want to, do all of the hard yards to prove whether it is or is not capable of, achieving that requirement. But what you will do is you'll have technologies like a tongue depressor that is very transient. It is invasive. it comes into contact with, the tongue, and it might be in other parts of the sort of regional anatomy. As a result of that, a GSPR for materials will be applicable. Similarly, though, if we think about the linear accelerator, there are GSPRs associated with ionizing radiation and high energy and active energy. Now, a tongue depressor is not active. Well, most tongue depressors are not active. I've not seen a mechanical tongue depressor. Someone will probably find that now or invent it. But we do have this sort of, its energy is not from sort of stored kinetic, or electrical power and anything like that. It's literally the human is generating the power, and therefore it's non-active. So all the non-active general safety all the active general safety performance requirements will not be applicable by means of the device characteristics itself. However, you might be able to think about a wound dressing and a tongue depressor, and both have to have the materials that will not have a deleterious effect on our health. They've got to be designed and constructed in a way that if, for example, either or both had animal derivatives, cells, tissues from animals, then a GSPR specific to that would be saying, guys, if you're using these materials, then please go through defined processes for veterinary controls, and then for inactivation of the actual, the viable cells themselves. So again, but they apply equally. The GSPRs are the GSPRs. Now, what's probably an important thing to say is that in order to sort of deal with that very, very clear difference between a wound dressing and an X-ray machine, or a infusion pump and a tongue depressor, or an orthopedic implant and a piece of software that's telling you that how well you're responding to your physiotherapy regime, if you've got that, you can see that we have to take standards or other means of being able to say, hold on a minute, apply the GSPRs at a top level, but now at a sub level for this product, we've decided to develop a standard, or for this process, we've decided to develop this standard. And this standard is helping you understand how to address that GSPR for this product group, for example, or for this process,
Right.
and that's really important for you as manufacturers to understand that, the GSPR is your starting point, but you could then be going through a myriad of standards that help you understand how those GSPRs are applied for certain product groups or technologies.
We'll come back to standards in a bit, I think, and how they sort of fit into this picture. But the GSPRs, they're focused on quality, safety, and performance, right? How is it structured within the regulations?
Well, we've got 3 chapters in the regulations. So you have in Annex 1, as we said, we've got a variety of general safety performance requirements depending upon which regulation we're looking at. I'm personally now just going to dash off into the medical device regulation as a reference. But what we can see is that there are, in terms of sections, 23 sections, but there are 139 approximately independent general safety performance requirements. It says shall. So you'll read that means the law. So if it's applicable, you have to apply it. But it's in 3 sections. The first is general requirements, and that deals with everything from clinical evidence to risk management to use-related error, how you control and how you'd identify and control use-related error, to the lifetime of the device and stability of your device, and of course, finally, to that sort of decision that the overall benefit has been achieved despite the risks and the residual risks that you have within the device. And there's a very explicit statement that condition can only be acceptable if it's achieving a high level of protection against the state of the art. That's the specific statement. So the first section of the 3, it deals with general requirements. And those general requirements go across both in vitro diagnostic requirements and medical device requirements. They're both interchangeable. You know, all IVDs and MDs have risks. They have performance requirements. They have lifetime sort of impacts. They have transportation and storage impacts. And of course, they all have to eventually reside at the decision that the benefit has outweighed the risk. They're interchangeable. And there are standards that we can talk about that are as applicable to an IVD around those process or general requirements as there are to medical devices. Where it starts to diverge, if you wish, that's in the actual design and construction or design and manufacturing requirements, which is in Chapter 2. Mm-hmm. And the Chapter 2 then are very IVD, MD. There are some equivalent, well, there are many equivalences. So, for example, an in vitro diagnostic may be active. So all of the electrical safety stuff will be applicable for an active IVD as it is for an active medical device. They consist of materials that may come into contact with humans. Most of the medical devices are around the professional, you know, the healthcare provider and the patient, whereas the IVD, you know, you obtain the specimen from the patient, but most of the contact is with the person who's actually doing the test. So it's very often the medical laboratory scientific officers, or it might be unless it's a self-test, which is then the lay person potentially, or the person who has the condition. And it's very rarely the medic. You know, the medic's getting a piece of paper that says positive, negative, blood grouping A, B, C, ABO, whatever. You know, it's getting, you know, that the practitioner is less at risk in the IVD than perhaps the patient or the user or the laboratory or, officer. And then the third section that we have is labeling and information for use. You know, very, very important outcomes of risk management, very important for, you know, performance to be understood, very important for the device to achieve its intended purpose. So we have those three sections, Phil, and that's the same under the MD and the IVD. But as I keep saying, they often segue to standards as well, that are applicable. So, you know, never just take the GSPRs into extreme sort of context. And an important sort of reference document that you can go to around essential principles is Annex 2, Section 4. Because in Annex 2, Section 4, it's describing what you have to do to show which GSPRs are applicable, what your solution is to addressing it in design, construction, manufacture, post-market labeling, you know, all the things you can do to show that you've achieved it. And then any links to standards, harmonized standards, common specifications, standards, and other methods. And then obviously the evidence that you've got. And that's a lovely, we used to call it the essential requirements checklist.
Yes, I remember.
But we've written the checklist into the regulation now, 4A, and it's got 4 columns. You know, 4A, is the GSPR applicable? What's your solution? Is there a standard applied, or what's the method that you've applied that's understood to be state of the art or a high level of protection? And then where's your evidence? And that's, you know, that's often, I guess, synthesized into a spreadsheet or a checklist or some document that tracks those requirements.
So this is a really difficult question now, and you know, this is where I think James, as a real expert here, you're going to really enlighten everybody with a different level of insight here. We mentioned a number of times state of the art. And of course, that's constantly changing. How can we keep up to date with state of the art when it comes to satisfying those GSPRs? Because if I'm a manufacturer of a new product, how do I know whether what I'm using is state of the art or not?
Yeah, it's a lovely question. I mean, if we look at the definitions or the definitions that are out there, we're basically talking about this sort of present science. So it's the science that's understood and applied. So if you took it as an X and a Y on a diagram. You've got what level of understanding we've got of the science. So is it a really high level of understanding, or do we not know very much about it? And then it's about how much of it has been applied. So on this axis, it's more about it's never been applied before to it's always applied this way. And if we put that in context of, let's say something really simple around electrical safety, using a fuse as a means of being able to break between a high degree of, let's say, current, we've got a state of the art. The most applied known science is here, and then the most known science is here, and that is to use a fuse. And then the most applied is to use a fuse. So you get that boundary of state of the art between the top levels. Obviously, if somebody comes out and says, no, it's not fuses anymore, it's residual current devices. We need these sort of really intelligent, smart, very sensitive sort of triggers that look at residual current and trip rather than fuse, then what you see is that the state of the art is now changing. Now, in the late 80s, residual current devices were not used. So if you did the X and Y, you would find a residual current device would have been not well understood, so it would probably be in here, and not very well applied. So it's at that point when it starts to say, no, we want it to be applied and we want it to be understood. And it's at that stage, the understanding increases and then the application increases. So what we're doing with that is technical committees come together all the time, literally every day. I was in a technical committee yesterday for artificial intelligence, and scientists, regulators, technicians, manufacturers all come together and are developing standards in a way that is reflecting that present science and its knowledge, and what's a high level of protection that we now really understand, and then do we need it to be applied? And at that stage, to be able to understand what the state of the art is a careful trick of knowing which standards development communities, what engineering or technical communities do I need to engage with, so that I can understand, our regulators changing their way. And you only have to look at cybersecurity, data science, data protection, and maybe artificial intelligence now to see how that is beginning to change. We're starting to see the science becoming much, much more understood in sort of threat detection and confidentiality, integrity, availability, and how you secure data. We've got a clear understanding about, we want the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations, to be changed and applied. So we're starting to see that known science wanting to be applied, and as soon as it starts to move out to those outer edges of the unknown into the much more known, then it becomes state of the art. And that's a really important sort of feature of how to stay on top of it. More practical sort of statements rather than theoretical are, okay, if you've got a standard that deals with the electrical safety of a medical device, something like IEC 60601 third edition, and now you need to hook into that technical community. You need to be looking on LinkedIn, being part of a group, or becoming part of a technical committee, be actually part of the committee, and you'll start to see, well, are we going to a fourth edition? What are we changing in the third edition? Is it going to get updated? And that way you can begin to understand when that dial moves from, okay, it's not really applied, to, right, fourth edition's coming in, it's going to be applied. You've got a 3-year transition period, off you go, and it's about keeping up to date with that. And again, as we mentioned in the classification workshop, the strategy for regulatory compliance is there to keep you in check with the changes to these standards, the changes to regulations, because it's not just standards. Regulations on cybersecurity are coming into force from Europe. Regulations on data protection are in force in Europe. Regulations on artificial intelligence and ethics are coming into force. You can see a white paper, a draft of a regulation. So that means that the state of the art is starting to change. So get top side of it, understand if you need or could apply, and then start to look at what your development pathway would be to demonstrate compliance with it. Sorry about that, Phil. I know it's very long-winded.
No, not at all. And I assume then, or am I right in assuming that those are the sorts of things that the conformity assessment body are looking for, to making sure that you understand the way that the environment in which you're using your product is changing, and how you're then adapting your data to demonstrate compliance against those specific GSPRs?
Absolutely. No, there is no other way. And in fact, notified bodies use a sort of a competency, methodology for the reviewers that is based on their understanding of that state of the art. So, you can be what you could class as a junior reviewer. The junior reviewer would be merely understand the technologies and understand the well-established standards that have been created for that particular product or that particular process. Yeah, that's what they're trained to look at. The higher seniority reviewers are the ones who step outside of that knowledge of where it's written in black and white standards into where is the science. They start to know this bit. The junior reviewers know the well understood and well applied. The more senior reviewers are the ones who are going off into and have been part of the technical communities over the years. They might even be in R&D before. They might have been part of university associations or universities themselves, institutes, and they'll have been thinking about what's the best way of characterizing the nanotechnology, or what's the best way of ensuring the absorption rate of a peptide or something. They start to understand the present science much more, and then they start to look at whether it's been applied as what we call a high level of protection or in accordance with the state of the art. The state of the art is well understood, although for some reason we had this blackout period over the last 10 years where everyone's just forgotten what state of the art meant. But we had this thing called development risk defense under product liability law. And the development risk defense is very simple. Did you apply a standard that's well understood, that's well applied, or did you do something that's not well understood? And if you can say, yes, I did, I applied something well understood, well applied and publicly available, you've got a development risk defense. Whereas if you said, well, actually, no, I didn't want to use residual current devices. I used my nail because I made this decision that that's a better way of controlling it than perhaps a fuse or a residual current. And of course, then you wouldn't have development risk, because it'd be saying, well, the standards all say you should use fuses, or the standards say you should use a residual current device. Why didn't you do that? So knowing where you are in the state of the art is not just the thing to get you through conformity assessment. It's the thing to keep you out of product liability.
Right.
It's as it goes. Right. And of course, it's the thing that keeps it safe. That's the whole reason. Right.
Going back specifically to the GSPRs themselves, in both device and IVDR, are they purely pre-market requirements, or do the GSPRs also cover post-market work?
A really good question. The GSPRs are continuous. They are, regardless of whether you've designed something to meet a particular GSPR, you need to be looking at that sort of change process in your own organization, whether you've done a line extension, whether you've changed a particular technological parameter or an intended purpose, or you've changed the packaging system or a sterilization method. Whatever is happening there, you need to be going back to the GSPRs. And the GSPRs state designed and manufactured, or often they might state more about what the information needs to be supplied to the user. So again, they are completely aligned with the product life cycle. Then they're not aligned with pre-market, post-market. It's the product life cycle. You consider those GSPRs throughout that product life cycle, from its inception actually to its disposal and its end of life.
So actually, it's another instance, I guess, of where the regulations are written in a way which means that, and I think it was one of your quotes actually, James, so apologies, you've probably got copyright on this, that you should never let the ink go dry on your particular document that you're working on. And this is an exact example of where that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that, as you've mentioned already, the state of the art may change quite rapidly. So one area, one big vulnerable area now is that, I think BSI published yesterday the sort of standards framework for digital health or software-based products. And I think they mentioned something like 190, I might be misquoting here, it's well in nearly 200 standards that are, in development or developed and ready to come into force, which is, that's a huge bolus of stuff that anyone who's dealing with medical devices, software, anything like that, that you don't want to be hit on the nose, with this abundance of standards at conformity assessment. You want to be, if you're a early stage SME entrepreneur, you want to be knowing that this full ecosystem of standards is going to be out there that covers everything from data to networks to cyber to AI algorithms, all that type of stuff. And it's coming now, and they're going to be coming into force quite extensively over the next 3 years. There's a batch of standards around AI, a batch of standards around cyber, a batch of standards around health IT. You can't just ignore them. So ultimately, those GSPRs that link to these standards are going to naturally expect different solutions tomorrow than they were today and yesterday.
So that leads us nicely on to probably the last area. I did promise sort of 5 minutes talking about standards specifically, and we've mentioned them throughout our little chat here on GSPRs. But when it comes to general applicability, are there sort of what are the sort of the general standards that people should be really aware of, and how can somebody find that list of standards which they can apply to GSPRs?
So probably the most important documents, there's two. There's one for medical devices and there's one for IVDs, and that is ISO 16142-1 and ISO 16142-2. And -2 is for IVDs, -1 is for medical devices. And this sets out how standards align to those general safety and performance requirements, or essential requirements at the moment. They will be updated. There's a mandate to SEN and SENILEC to update that 16142 in line with the new medical device regulations. But just get a feel by reading that document first. And it gives you a beautiful pyramid that talks about, standards are more general. Then we have product related, we've got process related, we've got technical sort of related standards, and then a very full alignment between the standards you can apply against the general safety performance requirements in the general section, GSPR 1 through to GSPR 8, and then those design and construction ones, GSPR 10 to GSPR 22, and then those labeling and IFU requirements in GSPR 23. So if you start with that 16142, you'll start to bump into all the things you're probably aware of and you've heard, 13485, the quality management system standard, 14971, the risk management system standard. You'll start to see, the full suite of standards that you could apply in a more general sense against those GSPRs. And that's a great starting point. It'll scare you rigid because you'll see all sorts of standards. But what is really interesting is then go on to like the ISO website and actually look at those standards. And you don't have to buy them. What you can do is you can browse, and ISO CEN, that's CEN, SENILEC, CEN, ETSI, ETSI, IEC, those standards bodies all enable you to view the whole scope, definitions, and the index as well And some of them let you look at the bibliography, and they all let you look at normative and informative references as well. So you could get to understand the structure. And then once you understand the structure of a standard, things are never as complex anymore. As soon as you take that effort to start reading, maybe read away from like ISO 13485 and 14971 and actually read a product related standard, because they have a very, very set way of being developed. And actually they are very consistent in the way that they are aligned to those GSPRs. So start with 16142-1 for medical or -2 for IVD. Read it. It's the best investment that you could make as an early stage or a late stage sort of manufacturer, or it's the best thing you could do as a manufacturer even if you've got products on the market, because now you're becoming exposed to the world of standards around those GSPRs. And once you've done that, you can then start to explore some of the more product related standards, the ones that exist for your product. You might have, what you have to do then is become aware of what they call the international classification system in standards. And once you know the international classification system, it's basically, I keep saying we're all relational people. It's just database stuff then. We have a code called 11.050, and 11.050 are medical device standards. And what you'll find is if you go onto the ISO website, you'll start to see that these standards have got, standards for infusion, standards for implants, standards for drug delivery devices, standards for software. You'll see those under that coding system. And a really, really good idea is to look at the working groups that are developing those standards and then plug into them. Literally, you can have email updates, you can, you can read a standard, you can obtain the standards. But I think, Phil, that would be the best one for me that I would point everyone to. I know most would say 14971 and usability and all that stuff. No, 16142 was written by people like myself who said, right, we've got these GSPRs. How do all these standards align to this? So you get a good sort of rubric immediately with that.
Fantastic. Last question. And on a sliding scale from will never happen to on the cards, you mentioned earlier on about the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, IMDRF. How aligned are we going to be in the future? Are we ever going to see a system where the general safety and performance principles are the same in Europe as they are in the US, for example?
It's a great question. And first thing we have to clarify is, who do you mean we? Do you mean the UK?
As a UK manufacturer, as a UK SME, where do I look? Do I look at where would you suggest I look? Do you think I should concentrate on the stuff which is coming out on IMDRF? Or I assume it depends where you want to market your product. Or do you want to sort of concentrate on the GSPRs which are in the European regulations?
Okay, so within the European regulations, we have a recital that actually acknowledges IMDRF and says, look, when we're thinking about, state of the art, what's up to date, what the present sort of best practices are, and I'm not sort of quoting that directly, it's paraphrased. But when we're looking at that, we will take into account the GHTF or the IMDRF documents, and that's in the context of technical documentation, GSPR, essential principles, and various other bits and pieces. That includes standards. IMDRF has not only essential principles of safety and performance, but it also has standards and how you apply them. And that segue. And as you're probably aware, it is also just produced a document on artificial intelligence and sort of software as medical devices have been there as well. So I would say on a sliding scale, it's highly likely because in the UK, as we saw today, the MHRA have become part of IMDRF. So if you're into your signals and game theory, you know that there's actually been a signal there that says we are aligning up to IMDRF because we need to, So I would say that the likelihood is high, especially now. But then let's wait, or let's not say this, but unfortunately in medical devices, if you track medical device law and regulation, and you do a timeline of when law and regulation comes in, you'll see that timeline follows some humongous outbreak of a problem. So at the moment, while the going's good and touch wood, we've not had any really, really major events since 2012, maybe, then I could only presume that we would look at IMDRF as being the guiding light, because we're all participating, we're all trying to be collegiate. That sort of group of knowledge is much more valuable than that single entity. So the group experience of cyber, the group experience of usability, the group experience of software validation, nothing better than getting that from multiple jurisdictions, as opposed to unilateral. So I kind of think high, but watch this space in case there's another screw up.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, James. We could have kept going for ages. I'm sure that we'll sort of talk again on some other aspects of how GSPRs work, particularly as they perhaps cover things like technical files and what a technical file perhaps looks like. But we'll leave that for a later date. I want to thank you again for taking your time, for giving us such insightful knowledge and intelligence as to where to start on GSPRs. So thank you again, James.
Thank you very much, Phil. It's been an absolute pleasure.